Paulo Costa versus Marvin Vettori takes place this weekend in the main event of UFC Fight Night Vegas 41, Costa versus Vettori, and I can't wait for this middleweight main event. Two top 5 middleweight contenders, number 2 in the world Paulo Costa versus number 5 in the world Marvin Vettori. They both desperately need this win to stay relevant in the middleweight division and stay towards the upper end of those rankings at a chance to maybe get back towards that title. Both guys are a very long way away from earning a title shot again. However, a big win here would be a step in the right direction. I am just so glad, before we even get into the prediction and breakdown here, I'm so glad that we finally have a good fight night main event. It's been far too long since we've had a very, very respectable main event of a fight night. Now, I know what you're going to say. What are you talking about, Guru? The UFC is $1 billion company. Of course there's always going to be good fight night main events. No, you're wrong. We just watched Aspen Ladd and Norma Jamont throw about 10 strikes around for 5 straight rounds in the main event of a fight night. Now we've got a real war with real things on the line, with real anticipation. I can't wait for this matchup. Paulo Costa, very dangerous early on. Marvin Vettori's got good cardio. He's very composed. He's got, I believe, a wider array of skills than Paulo Costa, but I think the things that Paulo Costa does, he does far better than Marvin Vettori, of course. I mean, Paulo Costa's got relentless pressure early on in fights. We didn't see that in his last one against Israel Adesanya. Of course, both of these guys coming off losses to Israel Adesanya, which sounds weird to say because Paulo Costa's Israel Adesanya fight happened a year ago, so where has Paulo Costa been? Now, of course, he pulled out of the original fight that he had. Can't even remember who it was against. I think it was against Robert Whittaker, in all honesty. Then he pulled out of another fight that he had against Jared Cannonier that was supposed to happen because he was making way for a hair transplant. There literally was no reason for why he pulled out, other than the fact that he was getting a hair transplant, I guess, and wasn't being paid enough for him to come back just yet, but I think he's being paid the same amount to take on Marvin Vettori, so I don't understand how that works. It's still a contract bout, but either way, Kelvin Gastelum stayed ready the entire time, ready to step in. Honestly, I think Kelvin Gastelum's ready right now. I can't wait to see Kelvin Gastelum versus Marvin Vettori this weekend, because we don't even know if Paulo Costa's going to show up. Maybe a couple follicles out the side of his head fall out and all of a sudden he needs another transplant. Who knows? But it's going to be an amazing bout. Fingers crossed we actually get both of these guys in the cage this weekend, and that's all I'm hoping for. Big matchup. I believe Marvin Vettori's got this one in the bag. Both guys coming off that loss to Adesanya. Very different fights to Adesanya. Paulo Costa got completely humiliated and embarrassed. Did absolutely nothing in the fight whatsoever. Just stood there and basically watched himself lose to Israel Adesanya. I understand people are going to say stuff like Israel Adesanya is just too good for him. The footwork was too amazing and all of this kind of stuff. And all of the praise goes to Israel Adesanya. But you've got to admit, Paulo Costa was not Paulo Costa in that bout, let's just say. Like, he was a very, very timid form of himself. He came out with a bit of confidence, but then he revealed afterwards with his game plan that his entire game plan was to ride out the first 3 rounds and then empty the gas tank in the 4th and 5th on Israel Adesanya. That was Paulo Costa's game plan in that fight, which is very interesting decision making, and it tells me quite a bit about the IQ levels of his team and him. In my opinion, Paulo Costa should have gone balls to the wall, sprinted headfirst, risking being flatline KO'd against Israel Adesanya, and just swung like an absolute maniac, grabbing a hold of Adesanya, punching him in the clinch, just getting a hold of his waist. Even if you don't get him down to the ground, just push him up against the cage, ram your forehead into Israel Adesanya's chin, rip body shots, go to the groin, land some good knees to the thigh and stuff like that. Foot stomps maybe, who knows. But instead he tried to have a technical striking match with Israel Adesanya, and that just doesn't work. But on the other hand, with Marvin Vettori, I know people shit on Marvin Vettori. I understand it. And people shit on Paulo Costa as well. Paulo Costa is still the guy that walked down Yoel Romero in the first round of their fight, dropped him, got dropped himself, but continued to walk down Yoel Romero after being dropped by Yoel Romero. Paulo Costa is still a savage of the savages. Marvin Vettori, on the other hand, is also one of those savages. People act like he got schooled against Israel Adesanya, and don't get me wrong, he lost very clearly to Israel Adesanya. There is an argument maybe for a round at best, and that's the argument we're having. I know Marvin Vettori at the time had the argument that maybe the win should go a different direction because he had his hand up at the end and he was praying for a victory with the judges. The only argument there is that when he had the back of Israel Adesanya and put in the rear naked choke, maybe you could give him that round despite being outstruck because it was close, because he had that attempt at a submission. Either way, very different fights between him and Paulo Costa. He actually gave Israel Adesanya a fight, and again, he won the third round against Israel Adesanya the first time. I know he didn't win the first two, but the first round's really close in their first fight that they had. Israel Adesanya won the fight clearly, but still, it's a decision. It's a split decision. It should have been a unanimous decision, but it's still a 29-28 decision at that. Marvin Vettori in the second fight with Israel Adesanya landed strikes on him, walked him down a little bit here and there. Of course, that's Israel Adesanya's game plan, to give up some space, sit on the outside, leg kick for as long as he can, and then go in for some exchanges later on. But Marvin Vettori landed good shots on Israel Adesanya. He walked him down a bit. He covered some bases. He took him down a couple times in that fight as well. He had his back. He had the rear naked choke. Israel Adesanya, of course, reversed it, ended up on top. But still, these are good moments that Marvin Vettori, as a 27-year-old man at the time that was definitely not ready for a title shot, can look back on and say, you know what? I was 27 back then. I've just turned 28 years of age. I've still got a solid 4 years of my prime, maybe 5 years of my prime, depending on how I take care of myself and how many wars I get into. I can actually maybe go forward and get this belt in this division when a guy like Israel Adesanya, who I know he acts like an 18-year-old, but he's about 32, 33, when he's gone, which eventually he will be, I'm sure, because he'll just get bored of defending it against all of these same guys over and over again eventually, Vettori can think to himself, I could be the 30-year-old in 2 years' time that could take this belt and defend it for another few years and make my own money. I think Vettori has got a lot of potential. Costa's also a young guy as well at 30 years of age. He's got a chance to rebound here. I just think in a 5-round bout, Vettori has shown that he's way more capable against higher-level competition than Paulo Costa is. I know the Yoel Romero fight is different, but it's a 3-rounder. But in a 5-rounder, the fact that Paulo Costa's game plan against Adesanya was to ride out the first 2 rounds and then get going shows me that he's not too confident in his gas tank, doing what he needs to do. That's a very important thing that I need to mention here. Paulo Costa is very good at onslaught, at relentless pressure, at breaking opponents down. He did it to Uriah Hall. He did it to Johnny Hendricks. He did it to Olawale Bangbos. We'll talk about those matchups soon because there's some things that people don't really notice in those bouts. Either way, he's very good at walking down opponents, pressuring them, relentless pace, relentless fury. The guy's going to break. He's going to get the job done. He doesn't want to do that in 5-rounders. This is a 5-rounder. In his own mind, in the last 5-rounder that he fought in, he didn't want to fight the way he loves to fight, which is walking someone down and putting pressure on them. If he doesn't do that, I don't see him outstriking Marvin Vettori at range in a slow-paced fight. I think Paulo Costa, to win this one, needs to go out there, push Vettori backwards, rip body shots against the cage. Vettori moves away, follows him down, constantly throwing shots. I want about fucking 100 strikes thrown per round by Paulo Costa here, as he usually did against guys like Uriah Hall, where he'd walk him down and unload like fucking 7-punch combinations against the cage, as Uriah Hall just fucking stands there and covers up like the coward that he is. No offense, but he is. Amongst absolute savages, Uriah Hall is a bit of a, he don't like pressure, let's just say. I shouldn't have used the words coward, but either way, it means what it means. Moving on. Paulo Costa needs to fight a certain way. Relentless pace, relentless pressure. He can't do that in a 5-rounder and survive the 5 rounds. Having that in his brain, I don't think he's going to fight the way he wants to. I think he's going to try and take it a bit slower, but have some bursts in big moments here and there in the first 2 rounds. But I think as the rounds go on, Marvin's got way better cardio than him. Way better cardio, way better fundamentals, and when you get tired, what do you resort to? Your fundamentals. We kind of just saw this with Wilder versus Fury. Wilder was looking good. Going to the body early, I know it's a completely different sport, but the analogy makes sense, and it was recent, so let me do this. Wilder was going to the body, he was doing real well. It turned out to be a bit of a war in rounds 3 and 4. All of a sudden, Wilder can't really do too much anymore. Completely exhausted. No fundamentals whatsoever. He gets exposed as the bad boxer that he is because he's tired. I think Paulo Costa's going to try and do a lot early. Not as much as he maybe usually does, but I think he's going to try and put the pressure on early. I think it's going to work out for the first 2 rounds. I think he'll win the first round. I think he'll slightly lose the second round, but there's an argument over who wins it. Then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th onwards, I've got Marvin Vettori just jabbing and moving, and I think he's actually good. I think he's going to get a finish. I think he'll finish Paulo Costa. Now, I know that Marvin Vettori is not much of a finisher, but fatigue is. Fatigue is a big finisher. And if Paulo's emptied out some gas on Marvin Vettori, who does not get finished in fights, this needs to be mentioned. Against Adesanya twice, did not get finished. I know he lost, but he didn't get finished, and that's something that he can take away from that. He's got a granite chin. Adesanya says this himself. He's got a massive head, a massive neck. Really impossible to KO. I think Holland caught him at one point that sort of flustered him a little bit, but he survived, got back on the job at hand, took him down again, grounded out Holland on the ground pretty easily. I think Marvin Vettori is just so hard to finish. And he's got 5-round experience now. And he's been all 5 rounds for the first time in his career. No, the second time in his career. He did it against Jack Hermansson on short notice. He was training for a 3-round fight against Jacare Souza. Stepped up on 2 weeks' notice against Jack Hermansson for 5 rounds. And he was the one who was pushing the pace in those later rounds against Jack Hermansson. I think in the later rounds of this one, Paulo Costa's going to be tired. He's going to be taking some shots to the body. I think Marvin's going to start kneeing him to the body against a cage. As Paulo Costa does that thing where he backs up against the cage, puts his hands behind his back and says, come on, come and get it. I think Marvin's going to have some moments in the 4th round where he lands a couple of stiff shots in a row and Paulo sort of backs up to the cage and Marvin tries to close the distance and then Paulo starts egging him on to try and get into a brawl with him against the cage, like he was doing against Yoel Romero in that 3rd round where he was completely gassed out as well. And Marvin Vettori, I think, is just going to go to the body there. You know what I mean? He's just going to blast knees to the body. He's going to throw jabs to the body, right hands to the body. He's going to throw kicks to the body. And I don't think he's going to sit there headhunting Paulo Costa against a cage if he's that tired. And I think eventually, if he does that in those later rounds, Paulo Costa's going to end up hurt to the body. He's going to end up on the canvas. And I think Marvin Vettori's going to unload ground and pound. Paulo Costa's going to give up his neck. And Marvin's going to choke him out. I think I'm going to call a 4th or 5th round submission for Marvin Vettori. I'll go with a late 4th round submission because I'm feeling a bit extra confident. I'll go late 4th round submission, rear naked choke for Marvin Vettori. His pace is too much for Paulo Costa, and I don't see him getting finished because I'll tell you this. Other than the Yoel Romero fight, which I actually think Paulo Costa could have won, even though a lot of people think Yoel Romero should have won that fight, I think it was very close. I can see the argument both ways. It's kind of like, do you give the props to Yoel Romero for the volume in round 2 and the takedown at the end, or do you give the better shots landed to Paulo Costa? Yoel Romero outlanded him 40-37 in round 2. That's the only argument you really have in that fight. Even the 3rd round was pretty close as well, by the way, especially with that head kick at the end from Paulo Costa. It's an opinion-based fight, in my opinion. I don't think it was a robbery. It's just a decision that can go either way based on how you see it and how you kind of want to... It's that close of a fight, in my opinion. Great win. Yoel Romero just got dominated by Phil Davis. I know that he's good, Yoel Romero. He's very good. But and I really like his chances in fights moving forward. But I feel like Marvin's just a bit too composed. And Yoel Romero is a guy who can't really fight at a crazy pace for too long either. He's a guy who does slow down in fights. He kept his bursts of energy against Robert Whittaker very composed. He only did it in certain moments, then would take a round off. Like he hurt Whittaker badly in round 3, hurt him really badly, emptied the gas tank a bit, took round 4 off. Vettori doesn't take rounds off. He just puts a whooping on you. I think he broke the significant strikes record at middleweight in a 5-round bout against Jack Hermansson, and again, on short notice. But you look through Paulo Costa's career, and you start looking at some of the opponents that he's taken on before the Yoel Romero fight. And don't get me wrong, the Uriah Hall win is a very good win to have. It's a great win to have. Uriah Hall was doing very good against Paulo Costa. You know what I mean? He was doing okay in the 1st round against Paulo Costa. In fact, Paulo Costa barely outlanded Uriah Hall in the 1st round, and even in the 2nd round, he barely outlanded him there other than the finishing sequence. He was walking forwards, he was the one pressuring the entire time. He eventually finishes Uriah Hall, but Uriah Hall hates being pressured, gives up whenever he's under pressure in fights mostly, and Paulo Costa gets to finish against him. Fair play, Paulo Costa, amazing performance, you get the job done against Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall is like designed to lose to Paulo Costa. And he almost finished Paulo Costa. He caught him behind the ear, rocked Paulo Costa, put him down. Then you go to the Johnny Hendricks bout of Paulo Costa. And you look at this matchup and realise that, hang on a second, it was 29-22 in the 1st round to Paulo Costa. He wasn't really dominating Hendricks in that first round. He was landing good shots and he was the aggressor, and it always seems like he's the Terminator. But Hendricks was keeping up with him in the first round, and Hendricks is not Marvin Vettori at this point in his career. Second round, Paulo Costa finishes Johnny Hendricks. All good, that's how it goes. Olawale Bangbos for Paulo Costa in the first round. Costa outlanded him by 5. In the second round, Olawale Bangbos is beating Paulo Costa before slipping on his ass, winding himself, and Paulo Costa finishes him off with ground and pound shots on top. Bangbos was mounting a bit of a comeback against Costa in that second round. I think Costa has a way of fighting which requires 3-round bouts, and he's booking these 5-rounders. Like, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do. You need to empty the gas tank. You need to go crazy and gas out in the 3rd round if they're still alive. He's not going to have the mindset to do that in a 5-rounder against a guy in Marvin Vettori who gets stronger as the fight goes on. And I think it's a recipe for disaster. I'll go with Marvin Vettori getting a finish in the later rounds. Marvin's very good, man. I look at the Omari Akhmedov fight where a guy tried to put pressure on him early in a fight in a 3-rounder. It was a draw. This was also in 2017, so a completely different Vettori as well. Omari Akhmedov put a lot of pressure on Marvin Vettori in the first 2 rounds of that fight. Was cracking him with big shots, walking him down, landing huge leg kicks, landing huge body kicks, landing big hooks over the top that at one point looked like they rocked Vettori a little bit, but he stays composed, keeps himself in the fight, keeps his guard up, keeps his hands up, keeps ready, keeps feinting, keeps moving. The 3rd round comes around and Marvin Vettori does what he needs to do to get himself the draw in that fight and pours on the pressure, landing about 10 punch combinations on Omari Akhmedov, beating the shit out of him with elbows in side control towards the end of the round, and gets himself a 10-8 round there. I think Omari Akhmedov is not as good as Paulo Costa, but maybe he fucking is, you know. Maybe secretly he kind of is, because you never really know with these kind of things. Either way, I'm not basing this entirely on the Omari Akhmedov fight. I just think it's a bad style matchup for Costa. Costa's good when he doesn't have to worry about cardio. He has to worry about cardio in a 5-rounder. Not to mention some of the simple statistics that you have here in the fight between the pair of them. Marvin Vettori's got a 2-inch reach advantage. This is going to be on the feet. Paulo Costa's got fucking T-Rex arms. Marvin Vettori has better striking defense. He's going to be on the defense quite a bit in those early rounds. He's got 63% striking defense. I actually think his striking defense is some of the best that he has. Paulo Costa's got crazy accuracy and crazy strikes landed per minute, because typically when he's landing these accurate punches, it's when the opponent is completely done and shelling up and he's unloading 20 punches at a time. Vettori's more of a jab and move kind of guy, so I think his accuracy is a little bit more representative of what actually accuracy is in a stand-up matchup. But either way, I'm going with Marvin Vettori. Paulo Costa's been chinned for the first time in his career against Israel Adesanya, humped in the cage, near enough impregnated if it were possible. Sorry, YouTube administrators, it just ain't, but if I get in trouble for saying that, whatever. Anyway, fucking hell. That's the world we're in. Fucking abominations. Anyway, Paulo Costa got impregnated. Where was I? Actually, my mind's gone somewhere else now. I don't think he's going to have the confidence anymore to be the guy that walks someone down, knowing that upon trying to walk down Adesanya at one point, he immediately got chinned. I don't think he's going to have that mindset. He hasn't been in the cage for ages. Vettori's younger. He's going to be improving more rapidly. I think Vettori trains at a better gym as well. I just like Vettori's attitude, man. Paulo Costa's attitude after losing to Israel Adesanya was excuse this, excuse that, excuse. Oh, this, we'll do this, the wine, the this. Marvin Vettori went for a run after the fight, a 5-mile run. A 5-mile run the night of the fight against Israel Adesanya. 2 days later, he was in the gym training. I like Vettori here. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.